The room went so quiet I could hear the air conditioning hum. My sister had just announced, in front of 11 family members seated around my grandmother's dining table, that she was cutting my salary to zero, not reducing it, not suspending it. Zero. Effective the 1st of next month. You've been coasting on the family name for 3 years, my sister said, loud enough for everyone to hear. This company deserves someone who actually earns their place. I looked down at my coffee cup. I said nothing. She mistook my silence for defeat. She always did. My name is Elena. I'm 32 years old. I have a master's degree in finance from Georgetown, 7 years of experience in corporate accounting. And for the past 3 years I have shown up every single day to Marsh & Associates, the marketing and consulting firm my grandmother built from nothing in 1987, and done my job without complaint, without drama, and without telling a single person what I had quietly done 18 months ago. My sister's name is Diane. She is 41, 9 years older than me, and she has spent the better part of our adult lives making sure everyone in the family understood the hierarchy. She was the firstborn. She was the one Grandma groomed. She was the one who took over as CEO when Grandma retired 4 years ago. She was, in her own words, the reason this company is still standing. I never argued with her about that. I never argued with her about anything, really. People who knew us both always found that strange. Diane was loud, magnetic, and absolutely certain of herself at every moment. I was the quiet one. The one who listened. The one who took notes. What people didn't know, what Diane especially didn't know, was that I had been taking very careful notes for a long time. Let me explain how we got to that dining room table. Grandma started Marsh & Associates with a single client and a rented desk in downtown Charlotte. By the time she retired, the company had 42 employees, a client roster that included 3 Fortune 500 brands, and a building she owned outright on South Tryon Street. She was proud of it in the way that only people who built something from nothing can be proud. It wasn't just a business to her. It was proof. When she handed the reins to Diane, the rest of us, me, our cousin Marcus, our Uncle Pete, were given smaller roles. I became the head of internal accounting, not a flashy title, not a seat at the strategy table, but I saw everything that moved through the company financially. Every contract, every vendor payment, every shareholder distribution. And what I saw over the first year made me very uneasy. I won't go into all of it here because some of it is still being reviewed by people whose job it is to review such things. But the short version is this. The company had 4 shareholders besides Diane. Grandma held the largest stake, about 38%. Diane held 25%. The remaining shares were split between a silent partner named Gerald Webb, a longtime family friend who had invested early and mostly stayed out of day-to-day operations, and 2 smaller stakeholders who had come in during an expansion round 8 years ago. About 20 months ago, Gerald Webb called me. He was 74. His wife had recently passed. He was moving to be closer to his daughter in Scottsdale, and he wanted to simplify his life. He had been thinking, he said, about selling his stake. He had approached Diane first. Diane had offered him a number that Gerald very politely described to me as an insult dressed up in a nice suit. He wasn't sure why he called me next. He said I had always reminded him of my grandmother. Serious. Observant. Didn't waste words. I asked him what he thought his stake was worth. He told me. I did not flinch because I had been watching the company's books for 2 years and I knew he was right. I told him I needed a week. That week, I called 3 people. My personal financial advisor, an attorney named Patricia Webb, no relation to Gerald. Just an unfortunate coincidence of surnames that still makes me smile. And my grandmother. Grandma was the most important call. She was 78, living in a beautiful house in Asheville that the company had helped her buy, and she was sharper than anyone gave her credit for. I told her what Gerald had told me. I told her what I was thinking. There was a long silence on the line, and then she said, very quietly, I always wondered when you were going to stop watching and start moving. She did not offer me money. She had already given us what she could. but she gave me something more useful. She told me the name of the holding company structure she had originally used when she bought the South Tryon building, and she suggested I speak to her original corporate attorney before I did anything else. I bought Gerald's stake through a holding company I formed called Ashford Capital Group. The name meant nothing to anyone in the family. There was no reason it would. It was registered in Delaware, which is where you register these things when you want them to be quiet, and it was funded through a combination of my savings, a small business loan, and a private arrangement with a co-investor I am not going to name here because she values her privacy. When the transaction closed, Ashford Capital Group held Gerald's 22% stake in Martian Associates. I was, at that point, the second largest individual shareholder in the company where I was employed as head of internal accounting at a salary my sister had set and could theoretically change at any time. I did not tell anyone, not Marcus, not Uncle Pete, not my best friend. I went back to work the next Monday, sat at my desk, opened my spreadsheets, and continued doing my job. For 18 months, nothing changed visibly. Diane ran the company the way she always had. I attended meetings, filed reports, answered emails. The only difference was what I knew and what I was watching. Then, 3 months ago, Diane hired a new VP of strategy. His name was Brandon. He was 36. He had an MBA, and very good hair and essentially no experience in our industry. And within 6 weeks, he had Diane's full confidence. I watched him reorient 3 of our top client relationships, propose a restructuring of 2 departments, and begin quietly suggesting to Diane that certain legacy roles were redundant. My role was, apparently, one of them. I noticed it first in small ways. I stopped being copied on certain emails. My budget requests started coming back with more friction. I was excluded from a strategy retreat that every department head had previously attended without question. I said nothing. I watched. I waited. The Sunday dinner was Diane's idea. She called it a family update, which in our family means Diane has a decision she has already made and wants witnesses when she announces it. My grandmother attended by video call from Asheville. My mother and my aunt were there. Uncle Pete. Marcus and his wife. Diane's husband, who has the practiced expression of a man who has learned not to have opinions at these gatherings. We had finished the main course when Diane set down her fork and said she had something to share about the company. She talked for about 4 minutes about vision and evolution, and the need to ensure that every role was earning its place in the organization. She used the phrase right-sizing twice. She talked about Brandon's restructuring proposal with the enthusiasm of someone presenting their own idea. Then she looked at me. "Elena," she said, "I've decided to eliminate the internal accounting director position. We're moving to an outsourced model. Your last day will be the 30th. She paused for what I think she intended to be a dramatic moment. "That means your salary goes to 0 as of next month. If you want to stay involved with the company in some capacity, we can discuss a part-time consulting arrangement. But I need people around me who are builders, not bookkeepers." Bookkeepers. I looked at my coffee cup. I could feel 11 pairs of eyes on me. My mother looked stricken. Marcus had gone very still. Uncle Pete was staring at his plate. Diane was watching me with the expression she has worn my entire life when she expects me to cry or argue or leave the room. I did none of those things. I picked up my coffee cup, I took a sip, I set it down. "Okay," I said. Diane blinked. "Okay? I heard you. Okay." She seemed faintly disappointed, the way a person is when they have prepared for a fight and their opponent simply sits down. She moved on to talking about Q4 projections. I listened. I asked a clarifying question about the outsourcing vendor she had selected. She answered it. The dinner continued. Under the table, I sent one text message. To Patricia Webb, my attorney. It said, "Monday morning. I'm ready." 2 days later, I arrived at the office at 8 a.m. as I always did. I made coffee. I sat at my desk. I responded to 3 emails. At 9:15, Patricia walked through the front door of Martian Associates, carrying a leather portfolio, and wearing the expression of someone who charges $400 an hour and knows it. She asked the receptionist to please notify Diane that there was an attorney present to call an emergency shareholder meeting as provided for under Section 7.3 of the company's shareholder agreement, which requires such a meeting to be convened within 48 hours upon written request by any shareholder holding 15% or more of outstanding shares. The receptionist, a lovely young woman named Caitlin, who I have always liked, stared at Patricia with very wide eyes and picked up her phone. I watched from my desk. Diane came out of her office 3 minutes later. She was wearing her "someone is about to regret something" face, which I had seen many times in our lives, and she walked directly toward Patricia with the energy of someone who has never once considered that she might be the person about to regret something. "I don't know what this is," she said, "but whatever client issue you're representing, you need to schedule through our legal team." "I'm not here representing a client," Patricia said pleasantly. "I'm here representing a shareholder." "Which shareholder?" Patricia glanced at me. I stood up from my desk and walked over. Diane looked at me. "What is going on?" "You asked me to transition out of my role by the 30th, I said. "I'm starting that transition today." Patricia is here to formally notify the company that Ashford Capital Group, which holds a 22% stake in Marsh & Associates, is requesting an emergency shareholder meeting to discuss recent unilateral changes to company structure and personnel. Diane stared at me. "Ashford Capital." She stopped. "What is Ashford Capital Group?" "It's my holding company," I said. "I purchased Gerald Webb's stake 18 months ago." The silence that followed was different from the silence at the dining room table. That silence had been the silence of people waiting to see what would happen. This silence was the silence of someone's entire understanding of a situation rearranging itself in real time. Diane's face did not go pale all at once. It happened in stages. First the slight parting of her lips, then the stillness, then the color, pulling back from her cheeks like a tide going out. "That's not possible," she said. "Gerald would have." "Gerald was under no obligation to notify any other shareholders before selling to a third party," Patricia said, in the tone of someone who has read the shareholder agreement more recently and more carefully than everyone else in the room. "The right of first refusal clause in the original agreement expired in 2019 and was not renewed. I have the documentation if you'd like to review it." Diane did not look at the documentation. She was still looking at me. "You've been sitting here for 18 months, she said. "Knowing this." "Yes, why didn't you say anything?" I thought about that question for a moment. I thought about every meeting I had not been invited to, every email I had not been copied on, every decision made about my role, my salary, my future in the company I had helped steward, without a single conversation. "Because I was watching," I said, "and I wanted to make sure I understood what I was watching before I acted on it." Caitlin was still at her desk, very carefully pretending to look at her computer screen. I noticed that she had stopped typing. The shareholder meeting took place 3 days later, in the conference room on the 4th floor. Grandma joined by video call from Asheville, and I noticed she had done her hair. Uncle Pete attended in person. The two smaller stakeholders joined remotely. Diane sat at the head of the table, where she had always sat, but she sat differently than she used to. The agenda was straightforward. The unilateral personnel changes Diane had initiated, including the elimination of my role, required shareholder approval under the company's governance documents for any restructuring that affected more than 10% of payroll. That approval had not been sought. Patricia walked through the relevant sections methodically and without drama. Diane had her own attorney present, a man named Douglas who kept making notes and then crossing them out. By the end of the meeting, the restructuring proposal had been tabled pending full shareholder review. My position was reinstated with back pay for any disruption to my compensation, and a governance review was initiated to ensure that future operational changes of significant scope would go through the proper approval process. Diane did not speak to me directly for the rest of that day. That evening my grandmother called me. "How do you feel?" she asked. I thought about it honestly. "Tired," I said. "But okay. Did you do it the way you wanted to?" I had wanted to do it without cruelty, without humiliation, without standing at that dining room table and announcing what I knew while 11 people watched Diane's face fall. I had wanted to handle it through the right channels, in the right room, with the right documents. I had wanted it to be clean. Yes, I said. I think so. Grandma was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You know, when I started the company, people underestimated me every single week. Not because I wasn't capable, because I was quiet, because I listened more than I talked, because I took notes." She paused. "I always thought that was the most useful thing I gave you, not the business, the patience." I had to set my phone down for a moment after that. The governance review is ongoing. There are some financial questions that have been referred to an outside firm, and I am going to leave those matters to the people whose job it is to resolve them. I am not interested in further conflict. I never was. What I am interested in is the company my grandmother built. The 42 employees who come in every day and do their work, the clients who have trusted us for years, the building on South Tryon Street that still has my grandmother's name on the door. Diane and I have had 2 real conversations since the shareholder meeting. They were not warm, but they were not hostile. We are, in the end, still family. We are still both shareholders. We will have to find a way to work inside the same structure. And I think we both know that. She asked me once, in one of those conversations, why I had bought Gerald's shares in the first place. What I was planning. I told her the truth. I wasn't planning anything specific. I saw an opportunity to invest in something I believed in. I bought it the way anyone buys something they believe in, quietly and carefully, and without announcing it to the world. "You could have told me," she said. "You could have asked me," I said. She didn't have an answer for that. I didn't expect one. The family is adjusting. Marcus told me he always suspected I had more going on beneath the surface than I let people see. Uncle Pete called to say he was proud of me, which made me cry in my car for about 10 minutes, which I am including here because I think it is important to be honest about the fact that doing the right thing and winning do not automatically feel triumphant. Sometimes they just feel like relief. My grandmother's company is still standing. I am still going to work every day. I am still sitting at my desk, still making coffee, still opening my spreadsheets. But I am sitting at the table now, in the right way, with the right documentation, and everyone in the room knows it. The quiet ones are always watching. Some of us are also reading the shareholder agreement. If you have ever been the person in the room who everyone assumed was small, the one who was overlooked, talked over, handed the lesser title, I want you to hear this. Patience is not passivity. Silence is not surrender. The most powerful moves I have ever made I made without raising my voice. Know your worth. Do your homework. And when the moment comes, let the documents do the talking.